Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. My name is Todd Embley and I am your host, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Marko Tiesmäki. He is the China Country Director for Business Finland. He has a wealth of APAC business experience, including China leadership roles at Nokia and Airbus. Marko, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Todd. Great to be here.
Excellent. So where in the world are you that we're recording you from today?
I'm actually sitting here in the middle of Beijing CBD in our office. It's a Dragon Boat Festival. It's pretty quiet here. The locals are on holiday, and I'm enjoying this quiet chat with you this morning.
Awesome. Well, let's kick things off and have you maybe tell us a story about your work with Nokia in the 1990s. Obviously, super famous, one of the most well-known brands in the world. How did you start there? How did you end up moving to China? And what was your role like with Nokia in that area of the world?
Well, Nokia was really the first job I joined since I graduated from the university. And one of the reasons I joined Nokia was that I saw it has an opportunity to take me to international arena. So I indeed joined 1990. And pretty much after I joined, I moved to Germany for the first 3 years, being one of the first account managers that Nokia introduced at that time. And really at that time, the GSM and the mobile telecommunication business was starting really this global boom that we've been witnessing for the past 30 years or so. So it was pretty pioneering things, new markets, small Finnish companies starting to break into first European markets, eventually globally. So it was really fantastic and in many ways exciting. After 3 years being in Germany, the things started to move around here in China, and China obviously was the market that was well known by that time already. It had huge potential, but really not that developed. So the same things we saw in Europe in terms of bringing new licenses, liberating the telecommunication seemed to be something that is going to happen in China. So obviously then we needed to pull really all the resources we could into this market, expecting this huge growth. And I was one of the first coming here on that one, and we were a small team of 30 odd people in the old cinema theater in Beijing, trying to set up the negotiation connections and all you got there. So it was really, I don't know, it was really exciting times. I always remember that as something you really don't forget, something you only have a chance to experience probably once in your lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of unique perspectives that you have that I do kind of want to ask about. Tell me first, though, what year was it that you actually came to China?
That was 1994, end of 1994.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, not a lot of people have that 90s experience. There's a lot more that came in the 2000s, including myself, and then there has been a ton since kind of 2010 on. But I'd like to kind of dive into that unique perspective around, as you said, mobile, right? And I mean, there's no more fun place to talk about the growth of mobile and what it did for technology, what it did for human connections, what it did for economies. I mean, and China is that place. It, as we know, when smartphones came out, it put 1 billion people in one country on the internet. So to speak, I mean, what a fantastic thing. So let's start by going back late 90s, mid to late 90s, early 2000s. What was going on in the mobile phone space? What was going on in the telecoms market? And I'll leave it open-ended like that.
All right, Tom. Well, I guess first point to make is that really before this all mobile connected internet became, it was really about introducing roaming in the voice connections. So it was kind of a big change started to happen early 90s towards the mid of 90s, where basically you didn't call a device in a room, you started to actually call people. And above all, the people where you could call them no matter where they are, and it became international. So we had, two standards were driving this, really, the European GSM and the one CDM coming from North America. And China chose GSM. So obviously that voice-driven mobility was the first boom that came starting in the mid of 90s. And yeah, like you said, indeed, after a couple of years, the GSM networks were built up, the markets were shared. China was at that time didn't have homemade technology, so it was really reliant on the global suppliers. And at that point in time, we had plenty of them. Nokia was one of them. And we were kind of a newcomer because the established companies had been doing more global business long, like our dear neighbors from the Sweden, Ericsson's, you had, Nortel, you had Lucent, AT&T first, Lucent later, you had Siemens. So there was a whole host of companies, and we came as a challenger. And eventually came up with a very decent technology, win market share. So it was really kind of like conquering markets, and you could see that how the company grew and all that. So yeah, that was the beginning. And then when you go towards the end of the 90s, obviously it became this whole IP internet thing started to grow hugely globally. But that was based on the context of using computers, right? So we were, like Nokia was among the first one introducing the idea of bringing this connectivity to the devices. We call it IP in your pocket, which was a bit of a joke, IP in your pocket, but that was something that we were launching, the early 2000s, late 90s, and that of course created a huge expectation on the next growth towards the end of the 90s. However, when it turned to the next millennium, some of your listeners might remember that that was the time we actually also experienced the first bust. So after 10 years of constant growth, the IP bubble burst, and among that also the expectations of how quickly really this mobile or internet connectivity can be embedded into the mobile devices. And that was probably in this industry the first sign when you realize that you have a vision, you get it right, and Nokia got it, I would say, pretty much right every time in terms of what's going to happen. But you greatly underestimate the what is required for the whole ecosystem and things to work together. And really, so when the I would say the third generation, as was called, the generation was supposed to introduce the internet in your pocket, as we said. It really only happened in the next generation, fourth generation. And what was driving that really was that I hate to say as an ex Nokia employee, but it was really the Apple devices that was really giving the end user experience that was driving the growth. So yeah, I mean it was kind of 90s was, like I said, constant growth, but then we also hit the bubble, and I remember being a relatively young still at that age and only experienced growth. It was also personally a kind of like shock that how can this growth that was supposed to be forever there suddenly didn't exist. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Those would have been really, really fun days. I mean, what was it like living in China during those times? I mean, compared to now, because I don't think there's anywhere in the world, and I say this probably quite naively, but I don't know anywhere that has changed so drastically or so much in all facets, whether it's transportation or logistics or technology or connectivity or what have you, than especially in China. So from even just the last 30 years, you were thinking 94 to 23. Just tell us about, I mean, you've been there, you've witnessed it. What's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Todd. I mean, it's amazing. I still keep on sometimes wondering how did this all happen? What made this possible? And we're probably not going to go into that what made it possible. But when we came here, mid 90s, it was a place that it's very difficult to describe. You had dark streets, hardly any lights, infrastructure was not existing. You couldn't purchase groceries and things that you used to consume in Europe or outside of China. The connections were terrible. Roads were not there. I remember landing for the first time in Shanghai Hongqiao Airport and took a taxi from there. Actually, the driver picked me up to the hotel. And for the first, 5-8 kilometers, it was only darkness. It was nothing. And I started to suddenly see that there's a light bulb somewhere over there. And suddenly, the residential area started to come up. But it was really sort of difficult to describe. Bicycles everywhere, people wearing very similar type of clothing. You didn't see much color on the streets. And when you walked in Shanghai streets at that time, went to certain areas, people were really looking at you like never seen a Caucasian before. And that wasn't unusual. That was nearly day. So if I took that, a starting point comparing to where China is now, which is, like I said, pretty much by any measures, a very livable international, has international million cities and all the offerings you can imagine. It's just unbelievable. And I think it went through a couple of phases. The 90s was really very successful for China because it really started to build the basic infrastructure. And you could see it everywhere. We lived in Shanghai, you just walked the block and there was another construction. The road started to be built up. The high-speed rail projects started to get, and it only accelerated actually throughout all the way up till today. And the result is what it is. So I don't know. It's still mind-boggling, Todd.
Yeah, I know. Even in 2007 when I arrived, I remember I because my bank card when I first got there was Interac. That was the big kind of a brand. And I had to hunt around the city, Dalian, 6 million people. I think it was CCB, the China Construction Bank, that actually had Interact as, it may have had Union Pay, a couple other things, but, it took me a long time to go even find a bank machine that was international that could fit and I could actually get money from. And, I've said this before on the podcast, when I landed, the first thing I thought was, man, I need to get in the crane business because that is all I can see everywhere I go, that or the elevator business. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about mobile and telecom because as we know and it's always in the news too, it's highly regulated industry, around the world. Here comes Nokia, foreign brand, maybe foreign technology, like you said. What was it, CDM versus GSM or?
CDMA,
something?
yeah, CDMA versus
CDMA.
GSM. That was the technology battle.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just curious about navigating regulation. What sort of challenges did Nokia face as a Finnish company that was bringing mobile infrastructure into China at that time?
I don't think the regulation was not really a negative issue because it actually opened up the market. The regulation is more for the operators who are actually building and operating in the networks, and that's still very strictly limited in China. Remains to be the case, but at that time it actually introduced new players and it actually opened up competition in that front for for Chinese operators. There was a new guy on the block called Unicom, China Unicom, and it was expected that it will create a similar kind of growth in China that we've seen the private mobile operators creating in Europe and in the US for that matter too, or North America. So it was more of an opportunity for us. The difference at that time, if you compare it today, was that China didn't have a domestic supplier, so they anyway were reliant on foreign technology for the couple of generations to come. And I would say that probably Nokia as a newcomer and Finland as a country was perceived and still is perceived relatively neutral and in a positive way in China. So I would say that it wasn't easy, obviously, but we were given an opportunity and Nokia capitalized on that.
Okay. You eventually left China. And I mean, you left Nokia, you left China. Can you first give us those dates of when you left? And because later you actually came back to China and you came back to Nokia. So can you just timeline that for me?
Sure. We left Asia. Last base was in Hong Kong in 2004. And one of the reasons we left Hong Kong was that we decided to move back to Finland for family reasons. We had 3 kids at that time, started to be at the age we needed to make decisions. Do we want them to come what? And we felt very strongly about, growing them up to become appreciating what we had in Finland. And we moved back to Finland. And at that time, a couple of years later, I still continued working for Nokia in Finland for a couple of years. But when the Siemens merger came, the famous Nokia-Siemens merger, then what happened, as so many times happens, I didn't find a really exciting position at Nokia, so I started to look around. And to my even own surprise, one of the small, medium, family-owned company selected me as their CEO. So I basically jumped from the global multi-conglomerate into a SME and took the CEO position, which probably I would say was probably one of my best decisions ever, because that offered me a totally new perspective and growth. And what was of course even more important is that this company was, despite of the relatively small size of 40 million euro annual turnover company, it was globally very engaging and active, and China was one of the markets the company already had a position. And what we did over those couple of years that I was helming the company, we expanded in China quite substantially, not only building new customers, but also bringing R&D, increasing the sourcing and developing assembly functions here in China. So I had an opportunity to look at the China and think about China from a totally different perspective for those couple of years I was doing these jobs. But then eventually there were a couple of other companies in between. But after 7 years, I've been doing SMEs. Nokia called me. An old friend of mine called me and Marko, what do you think? Would you be interested if you'd be given a position in China? You'd come back to China. Well, it wasn't a very long discussion with my wife and also the two kids we took with us. We were very excited about the opportunity. We said, well, what the heck? I mean, if you don't do this now, this kind of opportunity will not come again. So we decided to jump the bandwagon and come back.
Okay. Well, I imagine that you bent back eyes wide open, right? You'd already been there. You were probably very well armed with an understanding of, where you wanted to be and how you wanted to be. And so you were probably able to better design your re-entry into China, having been there before. However, as we know, China changes very quickly. And even a couple of years or a decade can make a huge difference. So I'm curious from your perspective, what changed in China that you remember being even still, wow, this is so different than it used to be? What changed in the mobile phone industry? What changed in the telecom market when you returned to Nokia in China in 2015?
Yeah, that's very true, Todd. I mean, 2015, and that was the time Nokia was executing already the acquisition of Alcatel-Lucent. So it was yet another big change in the industry, and that was very applicable here in China because Alcatel-Lucent was still one of the established, relatively large suppliers, and they were operating in many of these provinces that Nokia was not particularly strong. So it was actually very exciting, and we came into the time where we see that our market share, our position in the market will be improving a lot. But we also knew from the previous mergers that it's not easy to maintain your position in China. Typically, when these type of mergers happen here, they open the door to the competition, and in particular local competition. And also at that time it became crystal clear to me, although of course I had an idea about it, but being in Nokia and looking at it from the inside of Nokia, how strong the local competition has become. So the Huawei's and the ZTEs were really kind of becoming more and more dominant, more and more sort of well positioned in key provinces and areas. So it was from the day one, it was a you could call it an uphill battle, but we did first relatively well. So it was okay. We maintained to keep good market share and maintain the position. But the more and more the time passed, and when I left eventually Nokia, ever since what has happened here is that due to the the geopolitics and what has happened over the past couple of years, it has become much more tougher for foreign players to be in, and that's simply the fact of today.
It is. Some of the keys to being successful in China is the ability to constantly iterate and pivot and take risks and continue to evolve. When you went back and rejoined Nokia, what had changed from a business operations and strategy position or point of view within the company between those two times that you were with them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, ever since the first merger that Nokia decided to do on the infrastructure side with the Siemens and the following ones that happened, Motorola, etc., naturally they are shaping the company. So a lot of things have changed. But to my, I would say, personal appreciation, and I was very pleased to see that there was a very integral appreciation about the Finnish roots that the company has, especially visible here in China. That was a very positive experience and revelation to me. Obviously, the big thing that happened on the company level was that the devices that Nokia was so famous of, the mobile phones, the Nokia mobile phones, they actually were just spun off a couple of years before I joined or rejoined. So that the company has changed from basically being mostly recognized from its mobile devices and infrastructure company. And of course, that was a huge change. But yeah, I mean, obviously, when you go through so many new changes, it's basically, I would say afterwards thinking it's a small miracle that Nokia is so strong as it is today globally. And it has gone through a total kind of reshape of its business focus, strategy, and approach, I suppose. So in many ways, especially now that we are looking at the challenges we are facing in terms of climate change and all this green transition, digitalization is going across everything, and it's required for this to happen. And in that sense, very very pleased to see that Nokia is extremely well positioned to continue supporting that and taking the next growth path from there. So struggling years, couple of struggling years, but eventually pretty good outcome.
Do you ever remember a time or maybe a particular phase of the company where not only was Nokia adapting to China per se, but that all that time, because Nokia's had quite the tenure in China, more than most companies can claim, has the existence and time spent in China had any reverse ripple effect back up through the company? Have you taken cues and understandings from business in China, and has it come back and has it actually changed Nokia from within, saying that maybe we've learned a lot, maybe this could be applied and we can take from what we've been doing in China or what China has taught us and actually change some of how we operate or build a process, and then that has actually gone outward into other areas of the world?
Yeah.
Where Nokia operates?
Yeah, I mean, probably I wouldn't go that far saying it was what we learned from China, but obviously Nokia investments in terms of what Nokia was doing in China was very significant in the several areas of research and development. So a lot of the talents that were working for Nokia in China actually greatly contributed to our global success. So sure, operations in China continue to be a significant part of Nokia, to what I understand. But at that time, when I was still on board with the company, we certainly enjoyed a lot of the work that we did in China in the area of R&D. But to say that we took learnings from China per se and took them out, that would be a bit that I wouldn't recognize.
Right. I just, I felt like that was something that might occur. I wouldn't say it was something necessarily going to happen, for sure, but I've always wondered, could you take what China does or how China does things and actually use that to go and replicate how you do things in other areas of the world? I know that we always needed to adapt to China, and I know that China would often take what was done in other areas of the world and then localize it for China. But did you ever see any examples of taking what China does and then localizing that to other areas where you operated?
For sure, Todd. I mean, the previous head of European Chamber of Commerce, a gentleman called Gerd Butke, used to say that China is the fitness center for businesses. And I kind of tend to agree with him because and I used to think that if you can survive China, if you can do business in China, you can do it anywhere. A lot of the things how business is done in China, not only talking about the competition, but the way the so famous China speed. If you could replicate or implement any of that in any part of your operations globally or elsewhere, I'm sure it would greatly benefit the operations and companies' businesses. To me, that is a no-brainer. It's much more difficult to do it. It's easy to say, but it's difficult to do. But that's definitely something that the rest of the world could learn from China.
That's a good point. It really tests your mettle. It is kind of the CrossFit for companies to go there. That's your high intensity interval training for your company, and it really will. That's the measure of your company, your business fitness right there, operationally, procedurally, financially, everything. And if you're fit enough to do well in China, I think there's a pretty good chance you're fit enough to do well in other areas of the world. So that's a really good line. I like that. I might steal that and use that later in other episodes. We'll see. Okay, so I wanted to just ask a broad question, and it's funny because I want to say, hey, over the entire tenure of your time in China, open-ended question, what were some of the biggest changes that you've seen? However, I also, through my own experience, know that, well, which time? I mean, China has evolved not once or continuously, but multiple times. So I just want to preface, I still want to ask you the question of what have you seen and what are the biggest changes you've seen overall in your time there, operating, working, living, raising kids, all that stuff, in China. But, I just wanted to kind of preclude that question, knowing that there has been multiple iterations and changes and evolutions along the way.
It's a big one, Todd. I mean, it's difficult one because China is constantly changing, as you said, and we've been here now for 8 years, living here day by day, so you don't observe the change because it's evolution all the time, but it's still there. But if you really think about, the last 30 years, the first obvious change started to happen when we moved in mid-90s. And that was really China decided or took concrete actions to bring in the foreign investments and started to build its infrastructure, its own technologies, its capabilities, and open up the markets. And that was the main driver that started the first huge change. China changing from dark, muddy place even into something that we see today. And it was horrendous. Construction and development everywhere, basically. And then I guess the second change that led, it was a kind of logical change, was that China also, joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And that obviously opened up the market much more to the foreigners. And China was, deregulating the areas and offering more space for foreign companies to enter. And that's what you saw, starting, mid 2000 to sort of the first decade of 2000, so all the way until I would say 2015. That was a huge, basic, I don't know, liberal time or whatever you want to call it, but basically companies were enjoying, they were given business opportunities. China was embracing private companies to come, and they did, which great successes. And at that time, it was just about, nobody asked about whether we should go to China or not. It was just that you have to go there as soon as possible. And then I suppose the last big change is the recent, 5, 6, 7 years really, when China decided to change the course again and become a bit more sort of considerate, and you could even use the word controllable about what are allowed to do here without strong involvement of the party, etc., and whatnot. So I guess you can have a really, really big scheme of things. These are the three big phases I'm thinking about when trying to answer your question.
I know, and I appreciate that effort because it was a big, broad question that, I mean, how many times they've turned over so many things so many times that, it's a difficult question to answer. So thank you for that. After Nokia, you transitioned to Airbus. I don't want to dig or pry too much, but I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about your role there and your time there.
Well, Airbus, everybody knows them for their airplanes, but just like Boeing, they also have a defense and security arm. And the Airbus Defense and Security is having a unit called Secure Land Communications. But basically what they do, they provide communications technologies for public safety operators, police, firework, ambulance service, etc., but also critical utilities like transport. And so I was heading the Secure Land Communications Asia Pacific, and I was brought in to try to create the growth in the region. Traditionally, we've been very strong Airbus has been very strong in China and Hong Kong and a couple of other markets, but not really in the rest of the APAC. And we wanted to challenge that. So it was a traditional create a growth strategy, build your plan, and start executing it, which I did up to the point of execution during the time of which COVID hit and changed pretty much everything. And obviously Airbus being by vast a major aircraft carrier supplier had to deal with the challenges that COVID hit the airline industries, and the focus had to go somewhere else. So that was one of the reasons when COVID came that it looked like the execution of the plan we created was not possible, and I started to look around, or we started to discuss about other options, and Singapore, going back to Europe. And at that time, I took a note in the Finnish newspaper saying that there's a company called Business Finland looking for a China country director. And I said, hey, wait a minute, that might also be something worth considering. First, the idea was very weird. I've been all my life in the private sector, thinking about going to work for the Finnish government, with all due respect to Finland, obviously. But yeah, I took a look at it and I started to think about it. I knew the Finnish ambassador to Beijing at the time, so I thought I'll have a chat with him and say, what do you think about this job, and what do you think, should I apply for it? And he highly recommended me to do so, and I don't know, the rest is history.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about Finland's, historically speaking, Finland's relationship with China, and what are the main business and economic interests and relationships that they've had with China?
Oh, well, our relationship dates back to more than 100 years. Actually, we were one of the first countries, Finland that is, who recognized the new China when the Communist Party took over, and we've been always remembered by that. So it's something that speaks favorably for us, obviously today. But also the trade dates back to 70 years. Actually, today, this year, we are celebrating the first anniversary of the first bilateral trade agreement between Finland and China. So we've been doing business for long. Today, if you look at China, we have here somewhere between 250 and 300 Finnish companies who are doing business in China. They are representing quite well, all the major industries that you've known Finland for, paper and pulp, the forest industry, obviously one of them, the different machinery suppliers, chemical industries, maritime, etc., etc. So we've got all basically companies that have been traditionally doing international business, already doing business in China. A few exceptions, but by large, that's the case. But if you think about from Business Finland and Team Finland work in terms of trade promotion today, we are facing really exciting times, I think, simply because China is also changing their shift and focus in terms of where they're going to put their money in the future and where they see they need to invest more. And then you start to talk about things like green energy, energy transition. You start to talk about carbon reduction methods, all these kind of things that Finland is actually very, very strong in. So we're looking at a huge number of companies that we know have something unique to offer to China market, but are not yet there. So from Business Finland being a trade promotion organization, that's probably one of the biggest questions we are thinking about now. So all in all, truly exciting times from that angle too.
Are you facilitating a two-way relationship?
Meaning
representing and emboldening, may not be a word, but helping Finnish companies, Finnish trade, enter into China and be successful. But is it also you're helping potentially introduce Chinese business interests into Finland as well?
Absolutely. I mean, if you really look at the main functions, main services we provide in China market, which is, by the way, the same we provide in any other market as a trade promotion organization. Trade promotion is a big part of it. That's the biggest part if you look at the resources and investments we make in this country, doing exactly what you said. But we also are promoting Finland here as a destination for tourism, but also investments. And so that's also a very important part of the work we do. And last but not least, we actually have a very long-standing joint cooperation with the Ministry of Science and Technology in the area of innovation, so joint innovation, which dates back to 1980s even. So all these areas are things we are doing here.
Which sectors are the most exciting for you when you're talking about either, Finnish trade to China or China trade investment into Finland?
I mean, in terms of trade, it's the the things that have to do with carbon reduction and energy transition is the one that is really keeping us busy. So that's kind of like in the phase of sell. The other area is very similar is actually health technology, digital health technologies, and elderly care type of knowledge that we have in Finland. That's also extremely strong in demand today. But then we got emerging things coming up that we kind of like. I don't know if I could use the word market making or trying to make the market become, but then you talk about, moving from, recycle to circular economy. So you start talk about how to do this. Also, applying new materials, bio-based materials, all areas where Finland has a lot of innovation, a lot of good companies, but has not really yet become a main investment or business stream in China. It will come for sure. And then you have, of course, also the consumer market, which we are also looking at very, very keenly today. We believe that the consumer the consumption patterns in China are changing relatively fast. And I think we saw that during the COVID times, especially that there's a huge and increasing population of Chinese consumers who are basically appreciating exactly the same values and making their purchase decisions following similar values that you would see in any global Western country. Sustainability, looking for something more individual, durable than just major brands, and health aspects of nutrition, for instance, food products, cosmetics are very important, and that's traditionally the things that Finland is strong as. So we see great opportunities bringing Finnish consumer brands into China. They are not here in a big way, like you would say, Sweden with the IKEA and stuff like that. But I think now the opportunity is coming for more of these individual brands to come in. So that's definitely when I think about coming to China. In terms of investments to Finland, now Finland actually today is becoming very quickly a green energy superpower. Only over 90% of our energy in Finland is already produced from non-fossil fuels. So this will become or is today already a key attraction for Finland to attract foreign investments. And the Chinese companies are also facing the situation where they have to seek more and more growth outside of the China market because the market is not growing as it used to grow. So it's quite a natural development. And when they do this, they have to consider what's their optimal location, moving closer to their customers, markets. And when you talk about Europe, Finland is becoming more and more attractive place to consider as a landing. So that obviously is a very important topic for us. Specifically, of course, China is very strong in the area of electric vehicles and battery technology. So you could imagine that the clean tech, this type of driven or these type of areas are really very topical in our discussions there.
Yeah, and that's nothing, we're not saying anything negative about China and where they're at on that, because Finland is so far ahead of just about everybody else in the entire world that all countries, not just China, could learn so much about what Finland is doing and how they've done it, either from a political point of view, legislation point of view, or just product use, technology point of view as well. You're one of the best and one of the first and one of the most successful regions of the world with regards to that sector that everybody can learn from, China being no different. I want to drill down a little bit more into the consumer space, as you mentioned, and maybe just ask you, what are some of the Finnish brands that are potentially doing well, and in what sectors in the consumer space in China?
I would say that consumer brands, really, we don't have major big success stories that people would recognize, but there are a few that are already becoming more and more active. Marimekko, you can actually see one of the patterns behind my shoulders. Marimekko is increasingly gaining reputation in China. It has become visible on the street level. So that's certainly one of the leading brands that we see visibly here when you stroll around China market. And there are other consumer brands that come from the company called like Fiskars, which is more kind of a household design or design for work tools, etc. So that you will see more and more. But I think the real breakthrough still awaits, and I expect that if you look at, for instance, food segment, the food sector is still pretty much B2B, so it's basically not yet hit through. You see Fazer chocolate, and you see small things like that. But in terms of really significant impact and becoming visible, that's definitely a topic we are working on, and I expect that to happen in the next couple of years to come.
Now, to give a leading indicator to our audience of the last question I'm going to ask before we wrap things up, I'm going to ask one question in front of that and say, how famous is Teemu Selanne in Finland? Could he run for prime minister?
That's an interesting one. Well, first of all, how famous it is, of course, it's extremely famous. He's a well-known
Is he
figure.
The most famous hockey player in Finland?
I think he's still the most famous hockey player. It depends a bit which generation you ask. If you ask my generation, for sure, no question. But if I ask my son, I'm not sure he would give you the same answer. In terms of running for the prime minister or etc., I guess that's a good one. So I think you need to ask Teemu about that.
Yeah. So who would be in the running then, as far as famous hockey players that, and I do understand that in Scandinavia, it kind of depends on what little region you come from, right? You even in Sweden and whatnot, it kind of depends on, well, the Sedins, they could be the most, famous over here, but then it could be Matt Sundin from another area. But is it like that in Finland, and who was also in the running for most famous hockey player in Finland?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. Oh, these most famous things, they are obviously usually easy to pick from the names that are famous at the point in time where you discuss about them. Today you see the Mikko Rantanen, you see Sebastian Aho, you see Roope Hintz, you see you see the guys who are playing in NHL and doing really well. So I would guess that one of these chants would emerge as if you do a wider question. So yeah, I don't know. My personally also, I go quite a lot back to the Koivu brothers. Both of them I did are at their time something exceptional. So look, I mean, the list is so long that I'm sorry, I don't think your podcast has time to go more into this.
No, and I wish we just started a whole new podcast just talking about that. But that question that I wanted to talk to you about relates back to China. And you're a big hockey player. You play in the Beijing Hockey League, and that whole community. Just tell us about the hockey community in Beijing. Is it all expats? What are all the nationalities that play in there? And honestly, your time playing in that Beijing International Ice Hockey League.
That's true, but I probably have to set the record straight first. It's a big problem is I'm big at heart, but not that much in skills. But been enjoying all the 7 years I'm playing in the league. It's fantastic. It's simply one of the reasons that keeps us in Beijing. At least my wife is quite firm about that. That's the reason I refuse to leave. And it is actually because work-life balance. It's a big part of that, and the community is awesome. I don't know. Can you find any comparison anywhere in the world? It's a combination of several nationalities. There are Chinese players. There are obviously a few Finnish players. Canadians are the most surprise. And look, it's run very professionally with the resources available and the time available. My brother came here a couple of years ago and before the COVID actually, and joined the drafting session, drafting party. And he was totally blown away. I said he couldn't imagine that it's this level of activity and the jerseys and the caps and the team selections and all that. So it's undescribable, Chad. You need to experience before you can really understand what it's about. It's great.
Is it your favorite expat community in Beijing?
Oh, sure, by far.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. I also use hockey as the main component of my work life sanity, zen, balance that I need with everything else going on in my life with the kids and everything else as well. And I usually sneak away and take a 2-hour lunch 3 times a week just to go play hockey
Great.
over here. But we are blessed with, many sheets of ice per
Mm.
capita. I live in a town of 50,000 people, and I think we have 5 rinks. So that's just Canada.
Yeah.
We live in through hockey over here. But so I appreciate you taking that on, and it's great to talk to a fellow hockey player and a fellow expat. And I just really want to thank you for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure to have you.
It's good to be here, though. Thanks for a good discussion.
All right, everybody. That's Marko. Marko Tiesmäki. I have to practice that name a lot to get it right. But Marko Tiesmäki, thank you very much. He's the China Country Director for Business Finland. Thank you for coming on the show. And for all of you, quick reminder, if you're listening to us on the audio, on the podcast, don't forget we have the YouTube channel going where you can see us live and in color video. Go to the WPIC YouTube channel and you'll find us there. And for those of you watching us on YouTube, we have the podcast on all your podcast platforms that you might listen to. But for me and everybody at the negotiation, and for Marko as well, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.